Good morning. This is Ron. It is Tuesday, July the 24th. Welcome to Story Time. Thank you very much. This is Ron, your host, the only true conservative in the United States of America today, talking to all the butchers, bakers, and candlestick makers. So it occurred to me that it's a good idea to answer the question, what kind of news is relevant? If the news that's coming out of Washington, a lot of it is rather irrelevant to the average individual, what is relevant to the average individual? And I wanted to say that by and large, now, in general, the news out of Washington, if you're looking to make stock purchases and that kind of thing, and just in general, in terms of how you intend to vote in the next election, that kind of thing, then yes, it has a certain broad general relevance. But in terms of everyday life, the kind of news that really has the relevance is the kind of news about what's happening to regular everyday people. For instance, there's been in the news several people that have worn Make America Great Again hats and what's happened to them. In one case, a teenager in South Carolina was accosted by a man who took his hat away and splashed him with soda and then bragged about how he was going to throw it in the fireplace. And the man ended up getting arrested. There's another story about, an individual that did the same thing, wore Make America Great Again hat, and was subjected to taunts of various sorts as the individual walked down the street. Those are the kinds of things that are you want to know about because and are relevant because, again, as you're going to be out and about in conducting your daily affairs, you want to get a kind of temperature, get a blood pressure reading or a temperature reading on what is the state generally of the cultural state of affairs, so to speak. What can I expect when I walk out the door? Those people that know that I'm a conservative, are they going to be approaching me to confront me about various issues, and if so, about what? So I'm prepared. Another indicator is like what happened on The View with Whoopi Goldberg and her explosion in copying an attitude. You got to realize, too, that a lot of people watch The View, and they watch The View with the idea of copying what they see and hear on The View, and so they're going to go to their friends, conservative and socialist, and regurgitate, basically, what it is that they've heard on The View. So when you hear about something where Whoopi Goldberg has chastised somebody, thrown them off the set or whatever, pay a little bit of attention to that, to the details. What did Whoopi Goldberg say? And ask yourself, if I'm confronted in a similar manner by friends, relatives, people at the store, etc., what is going to be my response? And because it helps to be prepared. Because, again, you're going to defeat socialism, not wholesale. It's not going to come from the top down. It's not going to be legislated out of existence. It's only going to be defeated retail, one individual at a time. You and I defeating those socialists that we encounter in our lives on a regular basis. The relatives and so-called friends that we have and coworkers and whatnot, that those are the people we run into every day. If we can frustrate and thwart them, then the political socialists are going to have a much harder time getting elected and passing harebrained socialist kinds of laws. So those are the kinds of news things that you want to keep an eye out for. What's happening to the average man in the street? So when I come back, it's going to be a little bit of Rush Limbaugh from his 1993 interview with Playboy magazine. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And I'm going to be reading from the 1993 Playboy interview with Rush Limbaugh. And when we had left it, basically it's kind of an introduction thing. The interview is about introducing Playboy readers to Rush Limbaugh, who he is, what he's about, what he does, that kind of thing. So, and at this particular point in the interview, again, it's they're acting in good faith. I mean, and I mean Playboy. So, and we left it at this particular section. You will refrain from offering political points of view. This is Rush Limbaugh on this show. Okay, okay, it was not a big deal to me. It wasn't disappointing. At that point, I had no earthly desire to do politics on the radio. I was using the name Jeff Christie then. I can't remember why I liked the name. Playboy. Maybe because it's the diminutive of Christ. Limbaugh laughs. Well, that may be some unconscious door you've unlocked. Anyway, if all you ever do is radio, you know your job is to get into a tiny room that's encased by glass and sit behind a microphone. And in order to have an attitude of confidence, bravado, and positiveness, you have to talk into that microphone and envision everybody listening to you, actively listening to you, not passively. If you sit in there and say, "Why am I doing this?" you are not going to succeed. You have to create an illusion. You must. And I think that is the beginning of the ego problems and self esteem problems that radio performers have. Because once you leave that studio and go out with a friend and are introduced to somebody, nobody's ever heard of you. Nobody knows who you are. Well, that's a serious attack on the illusion you've created, and you begin to question it. It's a fantasy world in that studio. People who do nothing but radio are not nearly as successful as those who have done something else in their lives or are doing something concurrently. Playboy, but you were doing pretty well in Pittsburgh for a young kid, at least. Limbaugh, I was. Yes, I was 21. I was making $25,000 a year. I was driving a Buick Riviera. That was an $8,000 car. Playboy, yet you eventually left Pittsburgh. Why? Limbaugh, I was let go. Actually, I was fired twice in Pittsburgh. I'd been fired from another TV station or another station for playing Under My Thumb by the Rolling Stones too many times. Playboy, no kidding? Limbaugh, yeah, that violated the record rotation law. Playboy, there have been several stories about how you avoided the Vietnam conflict. Limbaugh, well, first thing, there was no avoidance. You implied that I undertook action. Playboy, escaped the war. Limbaugh, well, I didn't do anything. I did have a student deferment because I was in college for that 1 year, and I had a medical deferment for what is called pilonidal, pilonidal, I guess, pilonidal cyst. It's a tailbone cyst. I don't know if it's still something that disqualifies you, but it did then. If the thing flared up, which they are wont to do, it required major surgery. So I didn't do anything to avoid the war, and I had been called, and had I been called, I would have gone. Playboy, and politically you were then as you are now? Limbaugh, I was a hawk. Playboy, you've never been anything but a conservative. Limbaugh, right. You know, Playboy readers are going to smirk at this, but to this day I do not own a pair of blue jeans. And it's not just because of my size. The generation I grew up with wore t-shirts, tie-dyes, and jeans, peace signs all over them. At my little college, we had our contingent of anti-war protesters on campus, and they were all blue jean clad. But I started working when I was 16, and I loved the establishment. I wanted to be part of the establishment, capital E. I wanted to fit in with it. At 16, I wanted to get an early start on the 80s and the selfishness and greed that prospered then. I wink. I say this with a wink. Playboy, moving on. From Pittsburgh, you migrated the Kansas City Royals baseball team where you worked in sales and marketing. You have referred to those times as somewhat dark. Limbaugh, well, I wasn't a personality at all. I was stifled, stepped on. In a corporate situation, individuality is usually present only among people on the corporation's fast track. I was not going anywhere there. The purpose of a sports team is to win games. I had nothing to do with that. Playboy, you were married at that time. Limbaugh, yes, I was. I was married twice when I was with the Royals. First time my divorce took place about 6 months after I started there. Then I remarried 2 years later. Kansas City was a site of profound failure for me. Playboy, were you depressed? Limbaugh, yes. It was in those last years there that, for the first time in my life, I began to judge myself on such things as how much money I wasn't making and, therefore, what I couldn't afford to do. And that seemed to determine my relationships and friendships. I was going backward. I'd been making $25,000 in Pittsburgh, and yet here I was, 32 years old, making $14,000 or $15,000, and I was surrounded by tons of money. Yet through it all, I was never doubtful of my success. From the time I was 6 years old, I've known that I was going to do something, whatever it was, with fame and notoriety. I never, ever doubted that. It got me through a lot of the dark days. I always knew that it was going to happen. Always. Playboy, and meanwhile you continued to educate yourself. You're a voracious reader, right? Limbaugh, yes. Well, it wasn't then. I didn't think I needed college. It wasn't until 2 years after I quit college and went to Pittsburgh that I regretted not being educated. I didn't regret not finishing college per se. I didn't regret not having a degree. I regretted that I was a dumbass. So I embarked on a voracious, voluminous, omnivorous course of action designed to educate myself. I've been totally devoted to and obsessed with staying informed. And I graduated, to put it in terms that people understand, in 1983 when I left the Royals and went to the first adult radio station I'd ever worked for, a station that had me doing commentary. Finally, here's my test, and it all just fell into place. Playboy. Media tycoon Ed McLaughlin heard your Sacramento radio show and took a gamble on you, bringing you to New York on a $150,000 contract. Was that an exciting time for you? Limbaugh. Oh, yes, but it was also agonizing. See, I had found everything I'd ever wanted in life in Sacramento. Finally, after all these years, I mattered. I was a practicing member of the community. I was a big fish in a little pond. I owned a house. That's why I thought, oh, I've screwed myself. 150,000 is just not going to be enough to enjoy life in New York. Playboy, was it? Limbaugh, no, it was tight for about a year, but the percentage was fair. 150,000 against 30% of the net. And that escalated two ways, with years and with ratings. We tore up the original contract last year, rewrote it, and extended it through 1999. Are you going to ask at some point what the total sum of my efforts amounts to? Playboy, we weren't, but we will now. Limbaugh, well, there is so much speculation about this. Playboy, then let's clear it up. Limbaugh, yes, why not clear it up? Laughs. I'm always curious about this. This is a little game for me. Would you mind if I tell you all I do without giving you dollar amounts? Playboy, go ahead. Limbaugh, let's just look. I have a book that has about 2.5 million copies, which led to a contract for another book with an advance. There's the radio show on 600 stations with 5 minutes of commercial time an hour on each. So that's 15 minutes of commercials every day, 45 minutes a week. On TV, we have 220 stations for a 30-minute show, 8 minutes of commercial spots. I have a monthly newsletter, which is up to about 270,000 subscribers at a yearly rate of $29.95. Now, what else is there? There's the audio version of the book with 200,000 to 250,000 copies, and the paperback is going to hit in September. Playboy, so bottom line, more than 5 million? Limbaugh, for the year? Playboy, yes. Limbaugh, that's true. Playboy, that's what we needed to know, and that's why America is the place of miracles. Let's talk about something a little different. Female caller on one of your recent shows said that she would be glad, indeed honored, if you would father a child with her. You replied that right now you are incapable of a successful courtship. Why? Oh, we're finally getting to the Playboy questions. Playboy, you said it in front of 15 million people. Limbaugh, that was one of those instances where I was feeling a little sorry for myself because I think it's perhaps true. Past 5 years since my divorce and my move from Sacramento to New York, I've been resolutely focused. I mean, narrowly focused. Playboy, on? Limbaugh, me. I think it's one of the reasons why I've succeeded, because I've been able to immerse myself totally. However, that has created a void that, at the age of 42, I've only recently contemplated. I look at other people who are just as committed to their careers as I am, and yet they still manage to have a family and a relationship and other things that are not related to what they do. With my sudden realization of this void, I found myself desiring to fill it, but I've been afraid to because my relationships have basically been sour and I've ended up being distractions. I don't want to be distracted now. I don't want to get my feelings hurt. I don't want to feel sorry for myself or sad or any of that. I need to be up. I need to be enthused. And I need to like myself. Then I said to myself, that's a cowardly attitude. You have to take risks. Why don't you look at all of this as something that could enhance your life? I ask myself these questions and I answer, well, I recall my experiences. My experiences have been less than sustaining in terms of happiness and contentment. And I'm going to go ahead and leave it there. And so most of this, again, Playboy is acting in good faith, asking questions in a rather in a fair way. One of the other things that kind of disappoints me with Rush Limbaugh here is that when you got to the sum up point? What does all of this amount to? He didn't give dollar amounts, but he may as well have. I mean, you can kind of, well, I mean, he did give a general dollar amount, over 5 million. And first of all, it's considered kind of impolite, rather rude, to discuss the amount of money you're making. And more importantly, is that it's an invasion of his privacy. Now he volunteered to do it. He gave up the information voluntarily, but as a conservative, the idea is you err on the conservative side. You err on the side of, in this particular case, privacy. Because without privacy, there is no reason for private property. It doesn't exist. And one of the things that the left strives to do is to convince people that they don't have or don't have a need for privacy or have no expectation for it. There we go. That people, the average person, has no expectation of privacy. Okay, and then the next step is going to be, well, since you have no expectation for privacy, there's no reason for you to have private property. So Rush Limbaugh, by giving out that information, is setting a bad example. He could have summed it up by saying, I'm much more successful today than I was when I was in Kansas City. It's been a complete reversal or 180 or something like that, and leave it at that. Okay, and that goes for every conservative. When you're going to get the left that's going to coax you into giving up information about yourself and your life, and it's going to seem perhaps rather innocuous. Resist the temptation. Don't do it. One of the ways that we could all improve our lives tremendously is by not giving in to curiosity. And a lot of times the left wants to do that. They like to appeal to people's sense of curiosity. So they ask questions. Hi, can I talk to you for a second? And you're curious. Gee, what does this person want? Maybe they have money for me. Maybe they have puppies. And usually you're going to end up then thereby getting disappointed because they end up using the information that you give to them as a weapon, if not against you, then against other conservatives. So it's always a good idea to nix that. In any case, this brings us to the conclusion of another episode of Story Time. I thank you very much for listening, and have a great day.